Welcome back to BAS 121. Now we're going to talk about one of our primary data exploration and reduction techniques called clustering. So it's also called data segmentation. So what we're trying to do here is put things into groups so we better understand the data. For example, soccer moms. There's two main types. There's hierarchical clustering. That's where we start out and we either assume that there are multiple groups and every point is a group is a cluster in ourselves, and we put them together. Agglomerative method. That's where we fuse them together until we have one and only one cluster. So we start out with every data point's a cluster. We put the two closest ones together, and we keep putting them together until we have only one cluster. We'll show you that technique. There's also a divisive technique where you start with one cluster and split them. We won't be showing you that one. We'll show you 1A. The second method is a k-means clustering. It's also available in Excel Miner. We'll walk you through how to use that. That's where you decide how many clusters you want. They're either randomly or you fixed put a mean where you want your k's, and these will become a little more apparent as we go through the examples. But basically you'll go through an iterative process to try to center that cluster around a certain point. So let's go to the next chart, and maybe this will become a little clearer. So the hierarchical technique we'll be showing you is where we start out with several of these points, and we build them all up via clustering up until we have one cluster. Basically by saying which 2 points are closest to each other. Well, how do we decide which ones are closest to each other? Well, if you remember your old geometry, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure the distance of each one of these, and we're going to the two that are closest together, we're going to put in a cluster. Then the next two that are closest together, we're going to put in another cluster. And then the next two that are closest to each other, we're going to put into another cluster until we have one and only one cluster. Now, as we're doing this to the side, we're going to be drawing what's called a dendrogram, which will show us both which pairs of points we've clustered together, and it'll also show us the distance between each cluster. So we'll measure the distance between 2 points by using geometry. A squared plus b squared equals c squared, which, if you remember your algebra, is the distance formula. Now, the other thing we have to do is we have to figure out how we're going to measure the distance between each cluster. What that's going to help us determine is it's going to help us determine how many clusters do we want to have. Because if we're clustering two clusters into one that are very far away from each other, maybe we don't want to do that. So it's important to know, well, just how far are, like, for example, when we go from 4 clusters to 3 clusters, we might, in order to do that, we might be combining 2 clusters that are very far away from each other. So if we were doing that, we might want to say, no, I want to keep 4 clusters rather than consolidate down to 3 clusters. So there's several techniques to measure the distance from one cluster to another cluster. One method is a single linkage cluster. That's where you take the 2 points that are nearest to each other. So if I said to you, how far is it from Apex to Cary? I could take the 2 closest houses to Apex and Cary. That would be the single linkage cluster. And it would be a very short distance. Okay. Secondly, I could take the second thing I could do, the complete linkage cluster. I could say, well, what's the farthest house in Apex versus the farthest house in Cary, the farthest distance away, and measure that. And I could say that was the distance between the 2 towns. Or I could take the average or the middle of the average, the midpoint of each of the 2 towns, and say the distance between these 2 towns is from the middle of this town to the middle of that town. Or I could do the sum of squares criteria. So there's lots of ways, just like, what's the distance from one town to another? I could assume it's the two houses closest to each other, the two houses farthest away, or the average, the middle one. So when we get into XL minor, and you'll see in the example, you'll have to pick one of these methods. Most people are going to, usually I would pick the average linkage cluster, and I think that's the one the book picks also. But there are several methods, and in different environments you might want to pick different ones. So we're going to go into the example on the colleges and the universities and how we can cluster those. So I'm going to stop the video here, and I'm going to open up the Excel and walk you through this example.